Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Be More podcast, where we inspire you to be more of every role within the Salesforce, Slack, MuleSoft, Tableau ecosystem. And we are back after our short Dreamforce-related hiatus. And for today's session, we are talking Be More Chief Happiness Officer. And I'm joined today by Sarah. So, Sarah, without further ado, you introduce yourself to our audience, please.
I would love to. Thank you so much. And I mean, that really well-known role in the Salesforce ecosystem, Chief Happiness Officer. I think we should caveat that. My name is Sarah Metcalfe. I came into Salesforce and happiness at almost exactly the same time. So it's been like a parallel journey. My background was originally customer experience. Customer service, as we used to call it, just, in the old days. Came across Salesforce, kind of inherited that as an accidental admin. And at the same time, I was running the customer service department for a small technology startup company. And I came across the understanding of we needed to deliver great customer service. We were brand new, and so that was kind of what we needed to do. We had this amazing product. Nobody really knew about it. So what did we have to do? We had to support it with great service. So I got really invested in the idea of creating great customer service. And what I realized was it's not about, in an organization, it's not about creating great customer service. You actually have to focus on the well-being and happiness of your employees. And because I was doing Salesforce at the same time, I really got to play around with the science of happiness, leadership, positive psychology, how that impacts teams, organizations, as we're building a Salesforce org, as we're expanding, as we're doing that and bringing it. And so all of those three things for me really combine. So I think that's where it is. I ended up being had kind of finished off being head of CRM, and now I work as a director in technology, very much with that space. But I guess my chief happiness is I'm a certified chief happiness officer for Happy Coffee Consulting, which is my the other arm of my life. And I have spent just about 15 years now reading and studying everything I can on that science of happiness and how it impacts and improves organizations and people's lives and the outcomes that we need to have. So that's a little whirlwind tour around how they fit together.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I look forward to diving into that and exploring that more. And I think as I was listening to that and watching you, I couldn't help but notice your happy nails. So I feel like...
Oh, yeah, let's have a little... These are not only happy nails, they're happy Dreamforce nails.
Yeah.
So.
They're holding up quite well.
I know, yes. They probably have a couple more days, and then perhaps they need to go next. But yours are very, you're very, very green. I like it.
Yeah. I'm still haven't let go of practice summer just yet.
Good for you. Good for you.
So, we're just going to ignore the fact we were recording this in October. We're just going to move on.
We're still in the summer. It's the summer somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So back on topic, but looking at your role now and kind of diving into that a little bit more, it sounds lovely, right? Chief Happiness Officer. It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I would love to have one of those. So break it down for me. Like, what does that actually mean day to day? What type of roles, responsibilities does that entail?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a funny but very Salesforce-esque type of role, right? If we go back to the old days of a Salesforce admin, I would say a chief happiness officer is really very similar. But really, I think the reason we called it chief happiness officer, or it was originally called that, was when you look at the science of happiness, okay, and this is all the way back to the original, I guess, kind of teachings of positive psychology, right? The idea of doing things that make people's lives better. A lot of the focus on creating a happy workplace, and sometimes right now, actually using the phrase happiness can cause people some some cognitive dissonance. So I went, oh, why should we be happy? Or the world is having all this chaos and craziness. So, so a chief happiness officer is someone who is committed to doing things every day that make people's lives at work better. In the same way, someone working in the Salesforce ecosystem, your job is effectively to hear what's going on in the system and find out how you can make it better, right? That's what we're all doing when we're working on that platform, right? So it fits so well together, and it always has. But I think the real critical piece is, it's something I've always felt inherently. So the reason I guess I became aware of becoming a chief happiness officer was I worked for a large cancer charity, which does amazing research and amazing science. And I just happened to work in this really interesting team that wasn't a great place to work. So I knew that I had purpose with a massive P on it, right? The biggest.
Capital P, yeah.
But I didn't love coming to work every day, it was so weird. And so I left there and I went to go work for the company, which at the time made cat flaps. So from cancer to cat flaps, right? Something that has no P whatsoever if you look at it like that. But we had such an amazing place to work, and we had such a great team, and we were so successful as we were building this company. So there was this juxtaposition of how in the world did that happen? And that's what kind of connected me to that. And I started learning about the science of happiness. I started learning about what that means. Okay. And so the reason I talk about happiness, even though it can cause cognitive dissonance, is if you ask someone at work, we measure engagement a lot. Okay. But Tom, if you and I are speaking person to person, I would say, how happy are you?
Yeah.
You know what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
Happy, unhappy. That's how humans talk about emotions. Okay. And happiness is like an umbrella term for positive emotions. It doesn't mean happy clappy, pretending to be happy. It doesn't mean toxic positivity. It doesn't mean pretending stuff is great. Okay. It means focusing on making things better. It means if stuff is bad, how can you make it 1% better? Right. Obviously, with the goal to try to be there. It doesn't mean pretending that you're going to do that you're doing everything well, and it doesn't mean lying about things when they're bad. It actually kind of means being able to bring your whole self to work and having kind of that idea of being compassionate. So a chief happiness officer is someone who understands the background and does things like checks in with people every day. Hey, how are you doing? Good, bad, and remembers things, it's someone who takes 5 minutes, go have a cup of coffee with someone, go connect with someone, does things like gives positive praise and positive feedback. So we're really good at asking what we should do better. So basically where we failed. We're really good at that. And humans have a huge negativity bias, right? As humans, it's how we're built, right?
It's the fact.
What we needed to do, it's what happened, right? But that is not actually, it doesn't help us be more positive. It doesn't help us go forward. So when you think, Tom, I'll just maybe I'll turn it to you. Can you tell me about a time you were at work where you were just really happy, like a specific story?
Well, you put me on the spot now, and it's kind of tricky to find. Maybe just kind of when I was first starting out in the ecosystem, and I was kind of perhaps a little bit overwhelmed with a deployment because I hadn't really done it before, and I was new to using GearSet, which I now love. And at that point, I was on my journey to getting there. So, and it just worked, and I was so happy because it was kind of like this relief, this burden was suddenly lifted. It was gone, and the thing that I needed to get done was done.
Nice, very nice. And I'll just nudge you a little bit more. Were you working with other people at that time?
No, primarily on my
you were working on your own. Okay, perfect. So if you were working in a team, my guess is you would have had a great team. You would have had these things. But it's really interesting. You've told a great story because you haven't told a time when so you were new. So I'm guessing you weren't like insanely well paid, would be my guess. You were working really hard. You had a really hard challenge. that you needed to overcome. And so you weren't just sitting back, kicking back at work and having the best time doing nothing. You were learning, right? So all of these things, when we think about happiness, people tend to think like, oh, it's just this party, the school, the class parties or the work parties or the fun or the drinks or whatever, right? But actually the story you told me was about a time you were working really hard, had a big challenge, and you achieved it. Okay. And so the things that make up being happy at work are effectively, we kind of put them into the 4 areas, which is results, which is what you've described really clearly. Knowing that what you do matters, being able to measure that you've achieved something. So exactly that story you told, that you've got the autonomy, the knowledge, and the ability to do it. So your results, relationships. So again, if you're working by yourself, it's a little more challenging because you didn't have people to be there. But I bet you probably worked in an organization, or even if you think about the Salesforce community, what makes that special? It's relationships, right? And it's people who help you build on those positive things that you've done. And so those results, relationships. Then you've heard me talk a bit about purpose. So purpose can be a big P, which is I'm curing cancer. Wonderful. That's easy to do. More and more, we're finding it's the small P, which is what you described. How were you helping somebody? So you did something with that job and you made an impact for the people that you were doing that work for, I would imagine, and for yourself, right? And then just a tiny bit of play. So play is where everybody focuses, but play is this tiny bit. And so I think it's really important to think about creating that environment at work. So a chief happiness officer, what they do is look at those 4 areas and observe and be aware. And you can do that for yourself. So you might have a preference for one of those 4 areas. Like everything, we're all different. So some people might prefer results. Some people might prefer relationships. And so a chief happiness officer in an organization can be anything, but someone who, all the way up to someone who actually holds that role, and that's their only role, which is to create a whole culture where you're trying to create an environment where people can do their best work effectively by making changes and helping with those 4 areas. Just down to someone who is I think we've all worked in a place where maybe that person at the front desk or that receptionist is exactly right, the hub, the person, right? And so anyone can be a chief happiness officer, and you can be your own chief happiness officer, because some of it is also just about awareness. So what makes me happy? So now you've thought about a day that made you really happy. So on those days when you're not feeling so great, just have a look at those 4 areas, results, relationships, purpose, and play, and score yourself. What are you missing? What do you need a bit more of? And it's really interesting. I loved your results focus, because I am a real relationship focused person. So, and I almost over index on that. And there's tons of science about why so great teams are how work gets done, right? The highest performing teams are the ones who have the best relationships. And just to go back to that, so what I find is, because I over index on relationships, because it's my preference, when I'm not having a great day at work, it's because I haven't actually looked at my results. I haven't seen that I've made progress. I haven't seen the work that I'm doing, and I haven't taken the time to stop and acknowledge that. I haven't done my reflection on what I'm doing. So that's what a chief happiness officer will do. And sometimes they might create events, but often it's more just about helping people understand how can they move the needle. If you've had a really bad day, how do you make it slightly better? How do you check in with people? Anyone can be a chief happiness officer.
Well, I love that message, and I love the kind of mention of toxic positivity as well.
Because we can dig into that if you want. That is a problem, a big problem.
And people think about toxic, and they think about other things. Like they don't kind of put it in that oxymoron, like toxic positivity. Like they're so contrasting things. But I can totally, like, straight away understand what you're talking about, and it's kind of like people just kind of putting a face on things. And like the real things being brushed away underneath that metaphorical carpet, So I think it's important.
It's super important. And in fact, I think it's where people turn away from the teachings of kind of positive psychology and all there's so much evidence. I could spout loads of numbers, but there's so much
Yeah.
evidence about it, right? I won't do that unless you want to talk numbers.
No.
But the real, I think the critical piece that people think is, and that's the difference between toxic positivity and having a positive lens. And one is acknowledging when stuff is bad. So it's about coming, something that I've seen in an office that really focused on these ideas of happiness was, you've got a little board and you can just check in. How are you checking in today? You don't have to tell anyone. You just, traffic light or smiley faces, emojis.
Yeah.
So you can come in, if you're allowed to come into work, and instead of going, I'm great, everything's fine, right? Or like, the British way of greeting people, how are you? Oh, good,
Yeah. That's the only thing you can say. You're not allowed to
There's
answer
nothing else we're
any other way. Yeah.
today. Yeah. But actually, if you can come to work and as your whole self and say you're having a really bad day, actually the science proves that if you're allowed to show up and do that, then the likelihood that you're going to move and end your day better than you started is like 90%. But if you have to pretend that you're fine when really you're not, and smile and fake it till you make it, all of that stuff that's not what the science backs up. The science is really about being allowed to bring your whole self to work, and having a great team and having a great organization that focuses on and I say well-being and happiness together because they're both the right things, and they tie together. So there's a huge amount of work that's gone into looking at mental health and having mental health, and the science of happiness maps really perfectly to that. So we actually talk about a mental health diamond. So mental health is like physical health.
Yeah.
You can have good physical health or poor physical health.
Yeah.
When we think about mental health, we often only think about poor mental health, right? But actually, if you think about this diamond, you have poor mental health, which is below the line, and that's absolutely, people should get help for that. There is absolutely no problem in admitting that. That's what you should do. A lot of people are currently and have been since the pandemic existing in the middle, that kind of languishing space. I don't know if you've ever come across that phrase. So the kind of, I'm not in poor mental health. I've maybe made my way out of poor mental health, but I'm just okay, really. Then you have good mental health, and the practices that support creating happiness and the science of happiness and well-being are actually the same building blocks that help us move up into positive mental health. So just like training at the gym, you have to do the work. It's a practice. You don't all of a sudden turn up, then you're happy at work and everything's wonderful forever. It's not how it works, but it's a practice, right? Like mindfulness, like going to the gym, like any of those things. And if you can build those things that help you experience more positive emotions than negative emotions, and that's all it is. It's just about having slightly more than negative. It's not about not having negative emotions. So if you build that plan for yourself, where you build it with your colleagues so that people notice and are paying attention, then you start to create the steps that help you get to more positive mental health, so that when the bad things come, you don't fall as far, right? If you're just sitting and languishing and the bad things come, well, you can easily fall into poor mental health. So it helps you build that back up. So it is a really kind of critical thing. But lying about stuff, pretending everything is okay, and talking as if this is wonderful, everybody, instead of coming to work and saying, this is really hard, this is really bad, then that's toxic positivity, which does nothing but creates a complete lack of psychological safety. Nobody talks about anything, and you should probably leave that workplace.
I can relate to that from previous workplaces.
Yeah, and this is the thing, like we all know what that feels like, right? And it's the challenge around identifying it isn't that hard, because if I asked you where you had a great work experience or where you had a horrible work experience, you'll know, everybody knows what it feels like. It's it's something we experience in all of our lives. And yeah.
And I guess it's kind of about that transparency, being authentic is kind of what I'm taking away
Yeah.
from the conversation. And also, like, at work just today, right, my company's always interested about doing things for the better and improving and learning from mistakes. So it was decided that in an upcoming team meeting, we're going to be focusing on our failures and sharing our failures and, learning from them and being better. And I think that, at least in my mind, is a good thing, because that means the company's willing to listen,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
They want people to learn and
Yep.
improve and not make the same mistakes as other people. And I've been in companies where we didn't even talk about our failures. So, it's just complete other end of the spectrum. What do you think about that?
So I love the talking about failures. And my challenge is always, so you should always talk about them and you should always look at them. But the interesting thing, and that's almost in the same bucket in some ways, it can be in the same bucket as toxic positivity. So when you have full psychological safety, talking about that is perfect. Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Everyone learns from it and it's what you do. If what you're doing is only looking at your failures to find out what you should fix, I would say that has some negative connotations, because actually, when you're good at something, when you do something really well, you should do more of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're going to talk about your failures, absolutely should do. You should also create a space to talk about your wins.
Yeah.
What did you do well? How did someone do those really amazing things, so that everybody also learns how to do more positive things, right? So we have done that. And there's a great kind of story about, if Michael Jordan had a performance review. I don't know if you remember, he had this period in his career where he was like the most famous, recognized basketball player in the world, and then he went and played baseball for a little while.
Yeah.
It was okay, and then he came back to basketball, right? If you had done a performance review, or what you're saying, to talk about what he needed to do better, you would have said he should have doubled down and focused on baseball.
Yeah.
But actually, what was his strength? He should have focused on what he was good at, because he was really, really, really good at basketball.
Yeah.
So it's about talking about how you can get better and bringing yourself to acknowledge that. What do we need to do? How do we fix it? That's hugely transformational, and you should absolutely do that. But you should also pay attention to, what is your organization doing really well? How do we do more of that? And some of that might be by doing less of this stuff, and that's also okay. So, but I would just say, it's always about, like, it's holistic, right? It's the good and the bad. And because humans have that negativity bias, it's so easy for us to be like, and this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. I mean, it's easy. Like, our brains are built for that. And we actually have to practice to think about the good things. So I would just say, use it, but don't make sure it's balanced.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is, as a company, and I'm going to bring it back to technology now.
Yeah, do.
We use Slack, and we have a boom channel. So anything good happens, somebody goes above and beyond, whatever.
Amazing.
I don't know, as a company with maybe 150, 200 people, we have 3 or 4 booms a day.
That's awesome.
We have so many booms.
Yeah.
So we're flipping it on its head and trying to go the other way.
Yeah. And that's and that is also important, right? If you are over indexing on the positive, you need to then make sure you have the space for people to fail, because people then might feel like, oh gosh, everyone's perfect all the time and I'm not perfect, or I haven't got a boom, or whatever. So balance is, like, absolutely, this is, this is the right way to go about it. But I think it's it's also like having a language to share it. And when you're using that technology is such an enabler for this kind of thing, especially now that we're hybrid working and teams aren't together, right? It's so much easier when you see each other, but technology is that thing that can help you connect and still do all those, wonderful connection pieces and celebrating what you do well.
Yeah, exactly. I think the power of that, and the power of doing that across oceans, is super important.
Magic, right?
Super realized, like, in today's world, Like I
Yeah.
work with colleagues in Africa, I work with colleagues in America. So
Yeah.
like there's
Yeah.
so much, like so many miles basically between us, or so many kilometers,
Yeah.
depending on where you're
Yeah.
listening to this to, I guess, really. But yeah, super powerful. So anyway, picking up the pace a little bit.
Yes. Sorry, I get
I
all
feel like
excited.
it's fine. We both like to chat, right? And I'm
Right?
sitting here learning and listening, so like it's great for me. But thinking
Good.
about this now, if you were to summarize like
Yeah.
skills or attributes it took
Mm,
to be a chief happiness officer,
yeah.
what kind of 2, 3 key bullets would you kind of share with our audience? What do you think is important?
Oh, that's amazing. Honestly, I think if you want to be a chief happiness officer, um, so it's interesting. Initially, I would say like having a positive outlook is good,
Mm.
right? So being able to, however, some of the best chief happiness officers I know are actually a little bit more cynical than perhaps myself. Um, because they're really drilling into that. And so they do get a little bit more um, focus on, yeah, but why or what? So I would say actually a passion for improving things in the workplace. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is processes. So as a Salesforce professional, the reason this is really critical is when you have more of the positive mindset, you see more options. So you're more creative and you're better at problem solving. So that's one of the positive benefits. So someone who wants to make a difference, someone who feels like that, I think you might have to like people. Not gonna lie. Uh,
Yeah.
that would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that was quite,
That might, like, I think
yeah.
that might be an important thing. For me, actually, I think being able to articulate, because it's something I was challenged with, and it took me a long time. So being able to articulate the difference between kind of toxic positivity and really what the science says in terms of utilizing these kind of positive things to do that is really useful. So having some sort of understanding of the benefits and the reasons to do it. Mm, I always like to invite the introverts into the room because as much as most people won't believe me, I am actually an introvert.
So am I. Yeah, and again,
We
I
do,
feel like
yeah,
this. Mm.
yeah. So we do our jobs and we have to be here and we're out there and you can do that all day. But sometimes our little introverted brains can learn a little bit, see a little bit differently
Mm.
um and 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 sometimes you look at things because sometimes a chief happiness officer can accidentally just become a party planner
Yeah.
and just focus on those kind of the happy clappy stuff, which is where you get that. And it's not always there that the impact is made. So I would say if you maybe think you're not happy enough or you're not out there enough, then that's probably a really good indicator that you would make a great chief happiness officer.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so thinking about your own journey now to chief happiness officer, if you were to do that same journey again, what would you do differently? Is there anything you would change, switch up?
I try not to think because I always feel like you never know what like I always as my career has progressed there are places I would never be able to be now had I not done all of the crazy weird and winding paths
You've
that I
gone like
had.
this,
So
yeah.
part of me is like, but maybe I can reframe it. um I wish that I had doubled down on talking about happiness as an organizational tool earlier, honestly.
Mm.
I used to feel embarrassed about it. I used to be like, "Oh, it's a bit cringy. Not everyone likes it," or, and not everyone is gonna like it, hands
No,
down. And not everyone's gonna like everything, and that's
no,
totally fine.
yeah.
But I wish that I had been super brave and talked about it earlier because what you can do and how you can support people and organizations, which is really what drives me. This understanding it's the absolute criticality of creating high performing teams, high performing organizations, making things different, being able to problem solve, working in Salesforce. I would say using that lens of happiness, how to make people's lives at work better, is a game changer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and maybe just kind of turning it back on you a little bit there, but you had to go on the journey to realize that you could have, should have, would have done that sooner, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I had to go and dig into it and probably face the discomfort of people who challenged it, because I came to it in a weird way. Like it was something that I had always known, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't understand it. So I had to then learn how to talk about it. And then once I started talking about it, then you're right. Meeting that kind of the challenges meant I had to go and dig around to go, why is that? Or why do people feel like that? And so then be aware of how it lands. And then also I probably have in the past been toxically positive as I've gone through that learning journey. So I would do less of that. And more vulnerable and more honest about how I was showing up. Yeah,
totally. Okay, so now you've got an opportunity to kind of clarify, demyth something about being chief happiness officer. Is there anything that comes to mind that people think, oh, chief happiness officer is obviously this thing? Pick one of those, and what comes to mind, and what would you like to clarify?
I think that it's a job that has to have a title, that you have to have a certain background, or so when people see that as a job title, ever since I put it up there. So when did I become a certified chief happiness officer? 6 years ago. The biggest messaging or comments or anything I get LinkedIn and anywhere is, that's an amazing job title. I wish I could be one. So I think the answer being, you have to do something special or be something special or have a PhD in happiness to be chief happiness officer, which I don't have. You don't at all. And also probably the other side to that is that a chief happiness officer is happy all the time. So those would be my two myths to debunk.
Well, you're only human.
Yeah. And maybe I could tell a teeny story about the week that I really realized the power of creating a happy team. And we had a team that was amazing. And at the time, there was some challenges in the workplace, like bigger organizational challenges. And I was, kind of thinking like, oh, do I really want to be here, or is this what I really need? And on the Monday, one of our colleagues came in and shared with us that a family member had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she wanted to come to work, and she wanted to share that with us, and she wanted to be with us because she felt safe enough to do that. And at the end of that same week, one of our colleagues came in and shared with us that he and his wife were able to have a baby after trying for more than 10 years. And so having a team and an environment where people could come together and show up as themselves on what would effectively be their worst days and maybe their best days. Still to this day, quite a lot of years later, that is possibly one of the best weeks, best, worst, most crazy weeks of my life. But it's about creating an environment where people can bring their whole selves to work. And that's for me, what is actually behind being a chief happiness officer is that the really human centric side of creating workplaces that matter to people.
Yeah, being vulnerable, kind of being open, being honest, and also feel like I just have to say it, saying F to cancer.
I feel definitely
like part of it as well, like 100%.
100% of that. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we are bringing the session for today to a close, but before we do go, what's a way for people to connect with you, and is there any particular content that you'd like to share for our audience to kind of review and think about this a little bit more?
Yeah, I would love to. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Metcalfe. You can go to my website, which is Happy Coffee Consulting. It's called Happy Coffee because the easiest thing you can do to make something a little bit happier is to grab a beverage of your choice, doesn't have to
Yeah.
be coffee, and sit down for 5 minutes and have a conversation with someone that matters. And if you like, I can share a link with your listeners if you
Yeah.
want, Tom, and they can download a little kind of check-in leading with happiness thing, just little
Yeah.
tiny things you can do. And I would just recommend, um, yeah, just pausing and being aware. Happiness, we've got two types of happiness, what we think and what we feel.
Yeah.
And we are really good at doing the stuff that we think, which is, do I get paid well? Am I doing this stuff? All that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But what really impacts how we are at work every day is how we feel. So just doing that little bit of being aware, noticing, and checking in with themselves. That's something anyone can do. It doesn't take any longer than a couple of seconds. So just check in with yourself, see how it went, and what can you do to make your life just that little bit more positive today.
Yeah. Okay. Fab. Well, I think that's a great way to close things out. So thanks again for your time today, and hopefully we will inspire some more people to at least be more happy, if not more chief happiness officers. So thanks
The
again.
world definitely needs more chief happiness officers
Yeah.
at the moment.
More
Yeah,
happiness. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for listening.
Thanks.